4 strangers grabbed my wife on our doorstep last Tuesday while I was stuck at work. They had no idea what they just triggered. My wife isn't helpless, and our 2 family dogs aren't ordinary pets. What I'm about to tell you sounds impossible, but I have the footage to prove every word. This is a story about what happens when the wrong people pick the wrong family to mess with. Comment below where you're watching, because you're not going to believe how this ends. My name's Blake Hamilton. I teach high school history, and I never thought I'd be telling a story about suburban warfare. But that's exactly what happened when our HOA president decided to turn personal revenge into a neighborhood crisis. My wife Lily and I are both ex-military. I handled K9 units. She trained combat dogs overseas. We've got 2 retired service dogs, Titan and Zara, who most people think are just really well-behaved German Shepherd and Belgian Malinois family pets. What they don't know is these 2 are trained to detect threats, protect their handlers, and neutralize enemies without breaking a sweat. They look friendly enough playing fetch in our backyard, but they're basically furry weapons with perfect discipline and an unshakable loyalty to Lily. After everything that happened with Chloe Foster, I'm damn grateful we had them on our side. It all started 6 months ago with this letter taped to our front door. Official HOA letterhead, legal language, the whole 9 yards, claiming our dogs were disturbing community peace and property values, and demanding removal within 48 hours. Standard Karen behavior, right? Except Lily noticed something weird about the wording. It mentioned our veteran status being irrelevant to community safety standards. How did this woman know about our military background when we'd never told anyone except Mike Torres, our veteran neighbor across the street? More importantly, why was she researching us if this was really just about dog noise complaints? Titan and Zara barely bark unless there's an actual threat. They're too disciplined for random neighborhood nonsense. When I pointed this out to Lily, she got this look like she was trying to remember something important, but couldn't quite place it. "Blake," she said, studying the letter more carefully, "this feels personal. Like someone who knows way too much about us is trying to make our lives difficult." That same week, a drone started showing up over our backyard almost daily. Not the fun, recreational flying kind. This thing would hover in one spot for 20 or 30 minutes, clearly filming our property and our dog's behavior patterns. Titan and Zara would go on alert every time it appeared, tracking its movement with the kind of focus they use to reserve for potential explosives or enemy surveillance. When I tried to trace where it was coming from, it would immediately fly back toward Chloe's house 2 blocks away. It could have been a coincidence, but my military training taught me that coincidences usually aren't, especially when they happen multiple times in patterns. The dog's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Something was wrong, and their instincts were picking up on threats I couldn't see yet. After 3 tours overseas, I'd learned to trust their judgment over my own assumptions about suburban safety. More letters started arriving every few days after that. Fence height violations, car parking complaints, landscaping that supposedly didn't meet community standards. Each one escalating the language about enforcement action if we didn't comply immediately. But here's what really bothered me. I'd been living in this neighborhood for 5 years and never heard of half these rules before. When I dug out our original HOA documents to check, most of the stuff Chloe was citing either didn't exist in writing or was worded completely differently than what she claimed. Someone was either updating rules without notification, or someone was making stuff up and hoping we wouldn't call their bluff. Neither option made me feel comfortable about where this harassment campaign was heading. Lily started documenting everything in a folder, photographing each letter, checking dates and signatures like she was building a case file. Her military intelligence training was kicking in, and she was treating this like a real threat assessment instead of just neighborhood drama. Friday afternoon, while I was at work, Derek Nash showed up at our door for the first time. Lily described him as a big guy in his 40s, wearing a construction company shirt and carrying a clipboard with official-looking papers. He claimed to be conducting a city property compliance inspection and demanded immediate entry to assess our violations and animal behavior issues. When Lily asked to see his actual city credentials and badge number, Derek got aggressive fast. "Lady, this isn't a request," he told her, stepping closer to intimidate her. "We're here on official business, and you can either cooperate or we'll note your non-compliance in our report." The fake authority act might have worked on someone else, but Lily's dealt with actual authority figures in military command structures, and she could smell the bullshit from a mile away. When she refused entry and asked him to leave, Derek made it clear this wasn't going to be a one-time visit. That evening, I found more footprints around our storage shed, but this time they were accompanied by tool marks on our gate lock. Someone had been testing how hard it would be to get into our backyard when we weren't home. The prints were fresh, made during the day while I was at work, which meant Derek or his crew had come back after their confrontation with Lily to conduct more surveillance. I showed the evidence to Lily, and she went into full tactical mode, checking sight lines from our house to potential observation points, noting which windows gave the best view of our yard, thinking like someone planning defensive operations instead of just living in her own home. "Blake," she said, "they're not just harassing us randomly. Someone's gathering intelligence for a specific operation. The question is, what are they planning that requires this much preparation?" That night, we installed additional motion sensors and started varying our routines so anyone watching couldn't predict our movements. Lily spent that weekend researching everything she could find about Chloe Foster online, and what she discovered explained a lot about why this felt so personal and vindictive. Turns out our HOA president had quite a history in real estate before taking over neighborhood management, and not all of that history was exactly legal or ethical. The more Lily dug, the more she realized this wasn't random targeting. This was calculated revenge by someone who blamed our family for destroying her previous life. But the details of that discovery would have to wait until Sunday night, when Lily finally remembered exactly where and how she'd met Chloe before, and why our dogs had reacted so strongly to her presence even back then. Let me just say, when the pieces clicked together in Lily's memory, everything about Chloe's behavior suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. That night, Lily researched Chloe's background online and found something that made her go completely silent. When I asked what she discovered, she just stared at me with fear in her eyes and whispered, "Blake, what if she's not done destroying lives?" Tuesday morning hit like a freight train, and I still get angry thinking about how perfectly Chloe timed her ambush. I was stuck in faculty meetings at school, completely helpless, while my wife faced down 4 grown men who'd come to our house specifically to hurt her. The genius part of Chloe's plan was the timing. She'd been watching our routines for weeks, knew exactly when I'd be trapped in mandatory meetings, and couldn't leave to help. What she didn't count on was that attacking a military family means facing military consequences, even if those consequences happen to have 4 paws and sharp teeth. My phone exploded with messages around 10:15 a.m. First text from Lily, 4 men at the door claiming HOA emergency. Second text, Derek has fake city papers demanding entry. Third text, the one that made my blood run cold. Blake, they grabbed me. Dogs activated. I knew immediately what dogs activated meant. Titan and Zara had switched from family pet mode to combat protection mode. These aren't ordinary dogs, folks. When military K9s decide someone's a threat to their handler, that someone is about to have a very bad day. I dropped everything, told my principal there was a family emergency, and broke every speed limit between school and home. 20-minute drive became 12 minutes of pure panic, praying I'd get there before something irreversible happened. What I learned later from Mike Torres' security footage was that Chloe had orchestrated this whole thing like a military operation herself. She'd positioned herself across the street in her car, coordinating the timing through phone calls with Derek. The plan was brutally simple: overwhelm Lily with fake authority, provoke the dogs into biting someone, then claim self-defense while having witnesses ready to swear the animals attacked unprovoked. Derek brought along Jake Wilson and Tony Clark, both construction workers he'd hired for the day. Both told they were helping with legitimate HOA business and that any dogs on the property were known aggressive animals. These guys had no idea they were walking into a setup that could have cost them serious injury if my wife's dogs weren't so professionally trained to use the minimum necessary force. The confrontation started the moment Derek knocked on our door. Not a polite knock, mind you, but the kind of aggressive pounding that's designed to intimidate whoever's inside. When Lily opened the door, Derek immediately went into his fake authority routine, claiming they were there for an emergency HOA compliance inspection based on multiple community safety violations. He was waving around this official-looking document printed on city letterhead, complete with fake case numbers and urgent compliance language. To most people, it would have looked legitimate, but Lily spent years dealing with actual military paperwork, and she could spot the inconsistencies immediately. Wrong department names, signature stamps that didn't match, legal language that sounded impressive but didn't actually mean anything. When she politely asked to verify his credentials, Derek's whole demeanor shifted from fake professional to real threat. "Lady," Derek said, stepping into our doorway uninvited, "this isn't a request. We're coming in to assess the situation, whether you like it or not." Behind him, Jake and Tony were spreading out to flank the entrance, obviously following some kind of rehearsed intimidation strategy. The whole thing felt like a home invasion, disguised as bureaucratic procedure. When Lily refused entry and asked them to leave, Derek signaled Jake with a nod that Mike's camera caught perfectly. That's when Jake made the decision that turned harassment into assault. He grabbed Lily's wrist hard enough to leave bruises and started pulling her away from the doorway. "We need to secure the area first," he announced. Like grabbing someone's wife was standard procedure for city inspections. Tony moved to block her retreat into the house, and Derek kept filming with his phone, probably expecting to capture footage of interfering with official business. Instead, Derek's phone captured the most impressive display of military K9 precision most people will ever see outside of actual combat footage. The moment Jake's hand made contact with Lily, both dogs went from relaxed family pets to tactical weapons in under 2 seconds. Titan executed what military folks call a controlled takedown, swept Jake's legs with surgical precision, then pinned him face down with paws positioned to control without injury. Meanwhile, Zara moved into crowd control formation, positioning herself between Tony and any escape routes while maintaining that low growl that communicates, "I can end you anytime I choose to." The whole sequence took maybe 5 seconds, but watching it later on Mike's footage was like seeing a perfectly choreographed dance between predators who knew exactly how much force to use and when to stop using it. What made Derek's plan backfire so spectacularly was that his own video captured everything. Instead of vicious dogs attacking innocent city workers, the footage showed 2 professionally trained animals responding to assault with textbook military restraint. Jake was pinned but completely unharmed. Tony was backing away with his hands up, and both dogs were maintaining perfect discipline while awaiting further commands from Lily. When she said, "Release guard position," they immediately backed off from Jake and returned to protective stances without any hesitation or continued aggression. That level of control isn't something you see from regular pets. It's the result of years of combat training and absolute trust between handler and K9 unit. Derek stopped filming after about 30 seconds because it was becoming obvious that his dangerous animal narrative was falling apart in real time. By this point, our entire neighborhood was outside watching the drama unfold. Mike Torres was recording everything from his security camera, Janet Hayes had her phone out from her kitchen window, and at least 8 other neighbors were documenting the whole incident from different angles. The beautiful thing was that every single perspective showed the same story. 4 strangers trespassing on private property, 1 assaulting a woman, and 2 dogs defending their family with exactly the amount of force necessary to stop the threat. When Derek started shouting about vicious attacks and dangerous military weapons, our neighbors actually started laughing at him. Mrs. Patterson yelled from her porch, "Those dogs showed more restraint than you idiots did." Even Mr. Miller, who usually minds his own business, was telling Derek to get off our property before someone called the real police. The community support was incredible, but you could see Derek and his crew weren't expecting that kind of unified response. Deputy Lisa Carter arrived about 10 minutes after the neighbors started calling for help. And let me tell you, having a deputy with a military family background show up was the best possible outcome for us. Carter took one look at Titan and Zara, sitting at perfect attention, while 4 grown men made wild claims about being attacked, and she immediately knew something didn't add up. Combat-trained dogs don't sit calmly after real aggression. They either continue engagement or return to a ready position. The fact that both animals were responsive to Lily's commands while the men were still agitated told Carter everything she needed to know about who the real aggressors were. She reviewed Mike's security footage right there on his phone, watched Derek coordinate the grab on Lily, and her expression got harder with each replay. "Mr. Nash," she said to Derek in that cop voice that means business, "I'm seeing assault on private property and lawful defense by trained animals. Want to explain why you're claiming authority you clearly don't have?" The interrogation that followed was beautiful to watch. Derek kept insisting he had legitimate city authority, but when Carter asked for his inspector license number, employee ID, and department supervisor contact, he couldn't produce any of it. Jake and Tony started backpedaling hard, claiming they were just hired for the day and didn't know about any fake paperwork. Tony actually threw Derek under the bus completely, admitting he'd been paid $200 to help with official business, but never saw any real city documentation. When Carter asked who hired them and who was paying for this inspection, both guys pointed straight at Derek, who was desperately trying to delete stuff off his phone while handcuffed to Mike's porch railing. That's when Carter confiscated the phone and found the text messages that changed our entire understanding of what we were dealing with. As Derek was handcuffed, his phone kept buzzing with frantic messages. Deputy Carter picked it up, read the screen, and her face went white. She looked at me and asked the question that changed everything. "Mr. Hamilton, how many other families do you think they've done this to?" Derek's phone was like a treasure map to criminal stupidity, and Deputy Carter let me watch while she scrolled through 8 months of incriminating evidence that these idiots had documented themselves. I'm talking detailed text conversations with Chloe about timing, payment schedules for the hired muscle, even photos of our house taken from different angles, with notes about optimal approach routes. These people had been planning this harassment campaign like it was some kind of military operation, except they'd forgotten the basic rule about not leaving evidence of their crimes on their cell phone. Carter just kept shaking her head and muttering, "Amateurs," while screenshot after screenshot revealed the systematic nature of what they'd been doing to us. The text chain between Derek and Chloe went back exactly 8 months, starting right after she'd gotten elected HOA president. The early messages were all about gathering intelligence on the Hamilton property and identifying vulnerabilities for pressure campaign. Derek had been conducting surveillance on us since January, documenting our work schedules, noting when Lily walked the dogs, even timing how long it took us to respond to doorbell rings. There were photos of our yard from multiple angles, notes about our security camera positions, and detailed observations about Titan and Zara's behavior patterns. One message from Chloe made my blood boil. "Blake works Tuesday through Thursday at school, leaves by 7:30 a.m. Lily is home alone with dogs." Perfect window for controlled confrontation. These psychos had been studying us like we were enemy targets instead of neighbors. But the really sick part was discovering how many other families they'd done this exact same thing to. Derek's phone had contact lists for crews he'd hired to harass the Smith family on Oak Street, the Johnsons on Pine Avenue, and the elderly couple who'd lived on Maple Drive until they voluntarily sold their house 6 months ago and moved to assisted living. Each case followed the same pattern: fake violations, escalating harassment, hired intimidation crews, and eventually, families giving up and selling their properties. When Carter showed me the property records Derek had saved, I realized what we were looking at wasn't random HOA tyranny. It was a systematic land acquisition scheme that had been running for almost 3 years. Chloe wasn't just getting revenge on us, she was using her HOA position to force out specific families and get their properties at below market prices. The financial records on Derek's phone told the whole sickening story. Chloe had already managed to buy 3 houses on our block after harassing the previous owners into quick sales. The Smith family sold for $40,000 under market value just to escape the harassment, according to one of Derek's texts. The Johnsons took a $60,000 loss because they couldn't afford to fight the legal battles Chloe kept threatening. Mrs. Patterson's elderly parents on Maple Drive practically gave their house away because Chloe had convinced them their property was bringing down neighborhood values and they were creating liability issues for other residents. Each sale put more money in Chloe's pocket and gave her more control over our street. Our corner lot was apparently the final piece she needed to assemble a full development site worth over $1.5 million in profit. Carter called in the county fraud unit that afternoon, but that's when things got complicated in ways I hadn't expected. See, exposing Chloe's scheme also meant exposing how completely she'd manipulated the system to make it all look legal. She'd rewritten HOA bylaws to give herself broad enforcement powers, created fake city partnerships that didn't actually exist, and established relationships with contractors who would provide muscle while maintaining plausible deniability about their real purpose. The county investigators were impressed by how thorough her documentation was. Ironically, Chloe's obsessive record-keeping of her own crimes was going to be what destroyed her. But legal proceedings take time, and in the meantime, we still had to live next door to someone who just escalated from harassment to physical assault. The community reaction was split in ways that surprised me. About half of our neighbors were outraged once they understood what had really happened, especially after Mike showed his security footage around the block. People started sharing stories about their own experiences with Chloe's harassment, fake violations, unreasonable fines, threats about property values that never made sense. Janet Hayes, who lives behind us, admitted she'd been paying bogus HOA fees for months just to avoid confrontation. And she wasn't the only one. But the other half of the neighborhood was scared of getting involved, worried that opposing Chloe would make them targets next, or concerned that our situation was going to hurt everyone's property values if it dragged on. Mrs. Thompson, 2 houses down, actually suggested we just move somewhere more suitable for large dogs to keep the peace. That comment nearly made me lose my temper entirely. By Thursday, Chloe had regrouped and launched a counterattack that showed just how smart and vindictive she really was. Instead of backing down after Derek's arrest, she doubled down on the legal warfare, filing official complaints with animal control, claiming that Titan and Zara had demonstrated aggressive behavior patterns that made them dangerous to the community. She produced sworn statements from Jake and Tony, who were apparently willing to commit perjury to avoid their own criminal charges, claiming the dogs had menaced them during a legitimate inspection. Without video evidence clearly showing Derek's crew as the aggressors, animal control was required by law to schedule a behavioral assessment for our dogs. If Titan and Zara showed any protective instincts during that assessment, even natural responses to perceived threats, they could be classified as dangerous animals and seized permanently. The legal trap Chloe had set was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Military-trained dogs are naturally protective. That's the whole point of their training. But in civilian assessment situations, those same protective instincts could be interpreted as aggression by evaluators who don't understand the difference between attack behavior and defensive positioning. Carter explained the situation bluntly. Even though your dogs acted in self-defense, their military training could work against them in an assessment. Evaluators might see controlled aggression as proof they're too dangerous for civilian life. The assessment was scheduled for the following Friday, giving us exactly 1 week to find evidence that would prove Chloe's complaints were part of a systematic fraud scheme, rather than legitimate safety concerns about our family pets. That week was pure psychological torture. Every morning, I'd wake up thinking about how we could lose Titan and Zara, because they'd done exactly what they were trained to do, protect their family. Lily barely slept, spending her nights researching K9 behavioral law and trying to figure out legal strategies for proving our dog's innocence. Meanwhile, Chloe was conducting a neighborhood propaganda campaign, spreading rumors about our dangerous military animals and how we were hiding their true aggressive nature from authorities. She even started showing people photos of military K9 training exercises she'd found online, claiming they showed what our dogs were really capable of, and warning neighbors to keep their children away from our property. The psychological warfare was wearing us down exactly like she'd planned. Friday evening brought news that made my stomach drop to my shoes. Carter called with an update about Derek's phone evidence, but her voice was shaking when she delivered the information. The county fraud investigators had found something that completely changed the scope of what we were dealing with, something that made our situation look like small potatoes compared to the real conspiracy they had uncovered. But before she could explain the details, Carter asked me a question that made me realize we'd been thinking way too small about Chloe's operation. Carter's discovery would explain why Chloe was so confident about the legal system protecting her, why Derek's crew had been so bold about committing crimes in broad daylight, and why our neighborhood had been specifically targeted for this kind of systematic abuse. Hit the comments and tell me, have you ever discovered someone you trusted was hiding something dark? What's the worst thing a neighbor has ever done to your family? I read every comment while we get to the shocking truth about what Chloe's been hiding. Friday evening, the county called with news that made my stomach drop. They had discovered something in Derek's phone that changed everything about our case. But the officer's voice was shaking when she asked, "Mr. Hamilton, did your wife know she wasn't Chloe's first target?" Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp California air that usually makes you feel optimistic about life. But I had this knot in my stomach that told me today was going to change everything. The animal control assessment was scheduled for the following Friday, which meant we had exactly 6 days to prove our dogs weren't dangerous, or lose them forever. What I didn't know was that Chloe had decided waiting a week was too risky, and she was about to make the biggest tactical error of her entire revenge campaign. Sometimes, the best thing about dealing with arrogant people is that their overconfidence eventually becomes their downfall. I was loading groceries into my truck around 10 a.m. when I saw Chloe's car pull up with 3 vehicles following behind her. Derek wasn't with them this time. He was still in county lockup, but she'd brought 4 new guys who looked like they meant business. Construction workers, based on their clothes and equipment, but the kind who moonlight as muscle when the money's right. They spread out across our front yard like they were securing a perimeter, and the leader started banging on our door with the kind of authority that comes from knowing backup is standing right behind you. Lily was home alone again, which was obviously intentional, but this time I was only 5 minutes away and already moving. Unfortunately, 5 minutes can feel like 5 hours when someone's threatening your family, and Chloe was counting on that timing to create an incident before anyone could intervene. The new cruise leader introduced himself as Marcus Webb, claiming to represent Emergency County Property Assessment Division, whatever the hell that was supposed to be. He had official-looking paperwork, a clipboard full of forms, and the kind of confident attitude that makes people assume he knows what he's talking about. When Lily asked for credentials and department contact information, Marcus got impatient fast. "Ma'am, we're here on emergency authority due to complaints about dangerous animals on the premises. You can either cooperate with our assessment or face immediate property seizure for public safety violations." The threat was clear. Let them in to evaluate our dogs, or lose our house entirely. It was a brilliant escalation of Chloe's legal warfare strategy, except for one small problem. She'd finally pushed hard enough to trigger the exact response she'd been trying to provoke for months. When Marcus signaled his crew to secure the property for safety assessment, 2 of them moved to flank Lily, while the 3rd started filming with his phone. The plan was obviously to grab her away from the dogs, then claim the animals had attacked when they tried to protect her. Classic setup for a lawsuit that would justify seizing Titan and Zara as evidence of dangerous behavior. What these morons didn't understand was that military K9s don't react to threats the way regular dogs do. They don't bark warnings or give you time to reconsider your life choices. When trained combat animals decide you're a danger to their handler, you're about to receive a very educational demonstration of why military dogs are considered weapons of war, not pets. The moment Marcus's crew laid hands on my wife, both dogs shifted into combat mode so fast it looked like someone had flipped a switch. Titan executed what the military calls a controlled neutralization, swept the legs of the guy filming, pinned him face down with exactly enough pressure to control without injury, and held position awaiting further commands. Meanwhile, Zara performed textbook area denial, moving between the other crew members and any exit routes while maintaining that low growl that communicates volumes about your life expectancy if you make any sudden movements. The whole sequence took maybe 4 seconds, but watching it later on Mike's security footage was like seeing a perfectly choreographed dance between apex predators who knew exactly how much force to use and when to stop. These weren't angry animals attacking strangers. They were military professionals executing defensive protocols with surgical precision. What made the whole thing even more satisfying was that Marcus's own crew member had been filming the setup for Chloe's lawsuit evidence. So we had perfect documentation of who started the confrontation and how it escalated. The footage clearly showed Marcus ordering his men to restrain the subject, showed them grabbing Lily first, and captured the dog's response as pure defensive action rather than unprovoked aggression. When Lily gave the command, "Release guard position," both animals immediately backed off the pinned crew member and returned to protective stances without any continued hostility. That level of discipline and control isn't something you see from ordinary pets. It's the result of years of combat training and absolute trust between handler and K9 unit. The crew members who weren't pinned down were backing away with their hands up, clearly realizing they'd just discovered why military dogs are classified as weapons rather than animals. Our entire neighborhood erupted like someone had fired a starting pistol for the world's angriest block party. Mike Torres came running from across the street. Janet Hayes burst out of her house with her phone already recording, and at least 12 other neighbors poured out of their homes to see what all the shouting was about. The beautiful thing was that everyone could see exactly what had happened. 4 strangers on our property, grabbing our neighbor, getting professionally handled by 2 dogs who showed more restraint than most humans would have in the same situation. When Marcus started yelling about vicious animal attacks and demanding emergency services, Mrs. Patterson actually started laughing at him. "Honey," she called from her porch, "those dogs showed you more mercy than you deserved. Maybe don't grab people on their own property next time. The community support was incredible, but what really sealed the deal was Mike's security system capturing everything from multiple angles with perfect audio quality. Deputy Carter arrived at a scene that probably looked like absolute chaos from the outside. 4 construction workers making claims about being attacked by vicious dogs, while a dozen neighbors shouted about trespassing and assault. But Carter's got a military family background, so she immediately recognized what had actually happened when she saw Titan and Zara sitting at perfect attention beside Lily, calm and responsive to commands while the crew members were still agitated and making threats. Combat-trained animals don't sit quietly after real aggression. They either continue the engagement or return to a ready position. The fact that both dogs were waiting for orders while maintaining protective positioning told Carter everything she needed to know about who the real aggressors were in this situation. She reviewed the footage right there on Mike's phone, watched the whole sequence from approach to resolution, and her expression got harder with each replay. The interrogation phase was where Marcus's story completely fell apart. Carter asked basic questions about his department, supervisor contact information, and official authorization for emergency property assessments, and Marcus couldn't provide legitimate answers to any of them. His crew started admitting they'd been hired for one-day security work, with no knowledge of actual government authority, just told to follow Marcus's instructions and help control the situation if it got out of hand. When Carter confiscated Marcus's phone and found his text conversations with Chloe about timing and payment, the whole fake authority act crumbled completely. One of the crew members, probably hoping for leniency, admitted that Chloe had paid them $500 each to create documentation of aggressive animal behavior, and that Marcus had coached them on how to provoke defensive responses for legal evidence. The most damaging evidence came from Marcus's own footage, which he'd stupidly saved to his phone instead of deleting it immediately. Carter watched the video of him directing his crew to grab Lily, heard him coaching them on camera angles for the best attack documentation, and saw him coordinating with Chloe via text messages during the actual confrontation. "Mr. Webb," Carter said in that flat cop voice that means you're completely screwed. "This footage shows premeditated assault coordinated with Ms. Foster. You want to explain why you're claiming self-defense against dogs who were protecting their owner from battery?" Marcus tried to delete the messages while handcuffed, which just added evidence tampering to his growing list of charges. As the animal control supervisor watched the assault footage, she turned to Deputy Carter with a question that made everyone freeze. If these dogs are so well trained, why didn't they attack when they clearly could have ended this in seconds? The animal control supervisor's question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and I could see Deputy Carter processing the implications while she watched Mike's footage for the 3rd time. "You're right," Carter said slowly. "These dogs had multiple opportunities to cause serious injury and chose restraint every single time. That's not aggressive behavior. That's professional discipline. But here's the thing about bureaucracy. Logic doesn't always win against paperwork, and Chloe had spent months creating an official paper trail that made our dogs look like ticking time bombs waiting to explode. The system was designed to protect the public from dangerous animals, not to recognize the difference between military precision and random aggression. We were about to learn just how twisted that system could become when someone knew exactly which buttons to push. Monday morning brought Chloe's legal counterattack, and it was a masterpiece of bureaucratic manipulation that showed just how much she'd learned about gaming the system. She filed formal complaints with 3 different agencies simultaneously: Animal Control for repeated aggressive incidents, the County Attorney's Office for harassment by dangerous animals, and somehow even managed to get the health department involved by claiming our dogs posed public safety risks to neighborhood children. Each complaint was backed up by sworn statements from Marcus's crew, all claiming they'd been menaced and threatened by our unpredictably violent animals during routine municipal inspections. The beauty of her strategy was that she'd found ways to make every lie sound official and every agency feel like they had jurisdiction over our situation. The behavioral assessment scheduled for Friday became a legal minefield that could destroy our family, even if Titan and Zara performed perfectly. Animal Control explained the evaluation criteria, and every single test seemed designed to trigger the exact protective responses that military dogs are trained to have. Simulated attacks on Lily, loud noises meant to startle the animals, strangers attempting to handle them roughly, basically every scenario that would activate their combat training and justify seizure under civilian safety standards. Mr. Hamilton, the assessment coordinator told me, We understand these are service animals with specialized training, but civilian regulations require pets to show zero aggressive responses, regardless of circumstances. Any protective behavior, even justified, will result in classification as dangerous animals. The trap was perfect. Our dog's greatest strength would become evidence of their danger to the community. Chloe wasn't satisfied with just legal warfare, though. She launched a neighborhood propaganda campaign that was like psychological torture designed to isolate us from any community support. She started showing up at neighbors' houses with printed photos from military K9 training websites, claiming they showed what Titan and Zara were really capable of when their killer instincts were activated. She told Mrs. Thompson that our dogs were trained to attack on command and that we were hiding their true nature from authorities. She convinced Mr. Miller that allowing weapons-trained animals in residential areas was negligent endangerment of everyone's families. By Wednesday, kids weren't allowed to play in front yards near our house, and some neighbors were crossing the street rather than walking past our property. The isolation was exactly what Chloe wanted. If the community turned against us, we'd have no witnesses to support our side when the assessment went wrong. The worst part was watching Lily blame herself for everything. She'd spend nights staring at Titan and Zara, clearly torn between protecting them and protecting our community from Chloe's escalating harassment. "Blake," she said during one of those sleepless conversations, "maybe I should have just ignored the fake documents 3 years ago. Maybe I should have minded my own business instead of ruining someone's life." That broke my heart, because Lily had done exactly what any honest person would do when faced with obvious fraud, and now she was questioning whether honesty was worth the price our family was paying. I told her the truth, that bad people always blame good people for their consequences, and that Chloe's current behavior proved exactly why exposing her fraud had been necessary in the first place. Thursday brought devastating news from our lawyer consultation that made the whole legal situation feel hopeless. Even with Mike's security footage clearly showing assault by trespassers, California law regarding dangerous animals puts the burden of proof on the owners to demonstrate their pets won't pose future risks to public safety. Military training, ironically, worked against us in civilian court because it proved the dogs were capable of causing significant harm, even if they chose not to. The lawyer explained our options bluntly. Your best case scenario is keeping the dogs under strict behavioral monitoring for 2 years, with immediate seizure if there are any complaints. Worst case, they're classified as dangerous and destroyed. The legal system that was supposed to protect us was being weaponized by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate bureaucracy for personal revenge. Friday assessment day arrived like a death sentence we couldn't appeal. Animal control officers showed up with restraint equipment, evaluation forms, and protocols that seemed designed to fail any dog with protective instincts. Meanwhile, Chloe positioned herself across the street with Marcus Rivera. Turns out he was her business partner, not just some random developer, both of them watching like spectators at their own private gladiator match. The assessment coordinator explained that Titan and Zara would be subjected to standardized civilian safety protocols, including simulated threats that they must ignore completely or face immediate classification as dangerous animals. No protective responses allowed, no matter how justified or controlled. It was like asking soldiers to ignore gunfire and expecting them to still be effective protectors. The testing began with basic obedience commands, which our dogs passed flawlessly, because that's kindergarten-level stuff for military K9s. But then came the scenarios designed to trigger protective instincts. Strangers approaching Lily aggressively, loud crashes meant to simulate emergency situations, and finally, the test that nearly broke our hearts. An officer roughly grabbing Lily's arm while commanding the dogs to stay calm and ignore the situation. I watched Titan's muscles tense as every fiber of his military training screamed at him to protect his handler, watched him struggle between following orders and following instincts. Zara was trembling with the effort of staying in position while someone threatened the person she'd literally taken bullets to protect overseas. The assessment officers were taking notes about elevated stress responses and protective positioning, which were apparently negative marks against animals whose entire purpose in life was protecting their family. Just as the assessment coordinator was preparing to declare our dogs unsuitable for a civilian environment, Tina Coleman came running across the street carrying a USB drive and shouting for everyone to stop. Tina was Chloe's assistant, Nathan's sister, someone we'd seen around the neighborhood but never really talked to. She looked terrified but determined as she handed the drive to Deputy Carter and started explaining what she'd discovered about Chloe's real operation. Everything's fake, she was saying. The HOA authority, the city partnerships, even the assessment requests. I have 3 years of documented fraud, recorded phone calls, and financial records showing systematic theft from multiple neighborhoods. Chloe's been running an illegal land acquisition scheme using fake government authority, and these people are just the latest victims. The USB drive contained evidence that transformed our personal nightmare into a federal investigation literally overnight. 3 years of Chloe's communications with Derek, Marcus, and various hired crews, showing systematic harassment campaigns against dozens of families across 5 different neighborhoods. Financial records prove she'd stolen over $600,000 in fake HOA fees while forcing property sales to her development partners. Recorded phone calls where she openly discussed breaking families who opposed her schemes and making examples of people who tried to expose her fraud. The scope of the operation was staggering. We weren't just dealing with revenge from one bitter woman. We were facing an organized criminal enterprise that had destroyed lives across multiple communities. As county investigators arrived to arrest Chloe, she screamed across the street at Titan and Zara with pure hatred in her voice. "This is all your fault. Everything was perfect before you ruined it." But the dogs just sat calmly beside Lily, tails actually wagging for the first time in weeks. They'd served their country overseas, protected their family at home, and now they'd helped expose a criminal conspiracy that had been devastating innocent families for years. Mission accomplished, as far as they were concerned. Carter looked at the assessment coordinator and said something that made my week. "I think we can cancel this evaluation. These dogs just helped us solve the biggest HOA fraud case in county history." As FBI vehicles arrived to process the crime scene, Agent Morgan approached me with a question that made me realize our ordeal was far from over. "Mr. Hamilton, how many other families do you think they've done this to?" Agent Morgan's question about how many other families Chloe had targeted opened up an investigation that made our personal nightmare look like small change compared to the real scope of her criminal operation. The FBI's white-collar crime unit had been tracking suspicious HOA activity across 3 counties for over 2 years, but they'd never been able to connect the dots until Tina's USB drive handed them a complete roadmap of organized fraud. What we discovered over the next 72 hours would have been unbelievable if we hadn't lived through Chloe's harassment campaign ourselves. This woman hadn't just been running revenge schemes against individual families. She'd been operating a systematic criminal enterprise that destroyed communities while making herself rich. The federal investigation moved fast once they had Tina's evidence to work with. FBI forensic accountants traced financial records showing Chloe had established fake HOAs in 7 different neighborhoods, collecting illegal fees from over 400 families while forcing property sales through harassment campaigns identical to what she'd done to us. The total theft was staggering, over $2.3 million in fraudulent HOA collections, plus another $800,000 in below-market property purchases from families who'd been terrorized into selling. Each neighborhood followed the same pattern. Chloe would move in, get elected to HOA leadership through false credentials, rewrite community rules to give herself broad enforcement powers, then systematically target specific properties for acquisition. The Smith family, the Johnsons, Mrs. Patterson's parents, they were all part of a calculated land grab that had been running for almost 4 years. But the really sickening part was discovering how Chloe had been recruiting and training crews like Derek's for each neighborhood operation. Agent Morgan showed me communications where Chloe was literally teaching other people her harassment techniques, sharing strategies for breaking resistant families, and coordinating with corrupt building inspectors and fake city officials across multiple jurisdictions. Derek wasn't just her boyfriend helping with one revenge scheme. He was her business partner in a criminal enterprise that specialized in forcing families out of their homes through systematic psychological torture. The FBI had found evidence of at least 30 families who'd been driven from their properties using variations of the same tactics Chloe had used against us. The media explosion started Tuesday when local news picked up the story, but by Thursday we were dealing with national attention that neither Lily nor I was prepared for. Reporters wanted interviews about the military couple whose dogs exposed a housing fraud ring. Photographers were camped outside our house trying to get pictures of Titan and Zara, and our phones wouldn't stop ringing with calls from journalists who'd heard about heroic K9s taking down corrupt HOA president. The story had everything reporters love: military heroes, suburban corruption, loyal animals protecting their family, and a villain who'd gotten exactly the comeuppance she deserved. Lily hated the attention, but I had to admit there was something satisfying about watching Chloe's mugshot appear on every news channel, with headlines about HOA fraud queen and neighborhood terrorism scheme exposed. While we were dealing with media chaos, Chloe was mounting her final legal assault from county jail, and it was designed to hurt us even if she couldn't win any more. Her lawyer filed emergency motions claiming that Titan and Zara were unregistered military weapons, being illegally harbored by untrained civilians, and demanding immediate seizure pending federal investigation of our weapons permit violations. The argument was insane but legally clever. If our dogs were military trained, maybe they required special licensing that we didn't have. If they were weapons rather than pets, maybe civilian ownership was illegal. The lawsuit wasn't designed to succeed. It was designed to tie up our dogs in legal limbo while costing us thousands in attorney fees, even after Chloe's fraud had been exposed. Pure vindictive spite disguised as legal procedure. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, which gave us exactly 4 days to prepare a defense against claims that our family pets were actually illegal weapons. Our lawyer explained the challenge. Even though Chloe's fraud has been exposed, her claims about the dog's training create a separate legal issue that could result in seizure, regardless of her criminal status. We need to prove that military-trained dogs can safely exist in civilian environments without special licensing. The irony was crushing. Titan and Zara had shown perfect discipline and restraint during the actual assault, but their competence was being used as evidence against them. Meanwhile, Chloe was using her own criminal behavior as justification for why our dogs were dangerous to public safety. Community support rallied in ways that restored my faith in human decency during what felt like our darkest hour. Mike Torres organized a legal defense fund. Janet Hayes started a petition supporting our family that gathered over 800 signatures in 3 days. And neighbors who'd been scared into silence finally started sharing their own stories about Chloe's harassment campaigns. Mrs. Patterson admitted she'd paid over $3,000 in fake HOA fees just to avoid confrontation. The Miller family revealed they'd almost sold their house after months of bogus violations, and even people from other neighborhoods started reaching out with similar experiences. The pattern was clear. Chloe had been terrorizing families for years, and our case was finally giving other victims the courage to speak up about their own abuse. But personal support couldn't solve the legal technicalities we were facing. Federal court doesn't care about community sentiment when determining whether specific animals pose public safety risks. And Chloe's lawyer was arguing that military training automatically made our dogs too dangerous for civilian ownership, regardless of their actual behavior. The judge scheduled expert testimony from both sides. Military K9 trainers who would explain the difference between combat animals and family pets, versus animal behaviorists who would argue that weapons training could never be completely suppressed in domestic environments. Our entire future depended on convincing a federal judge that love and proper handling could channel military training into protection rather than aggression. Sunday night before the hearing, Lily sat in our backyard with Titan and Zara, practicing the obedience demonstrations we'd planned for court testimony. Watching her work with them was like seeing pure poetry in motion. Hand signals so subtle most people wouldn't even notice them. Verbal commands given in tones that conveyed absolute confidence and authority. Responses from the dogs that showed years of mutual trust and respect. These weren't just trained animals following orders. They were family members who understood their role and took pride in performing it perfectly. "Blake," Lily said as we headed inside, "whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know these dogs saved my life Tuesday. And they've been saving our family in small ways every day since we brought them home. They're heroes, not weapons, and I'll fight anyone who says otherwise." Monday evening, our lawyer called with final preparations for Tuesday's hearing, but his voice carried a tension that made me nervous about our chances. Federal prosecutors were supporting our case because of Chloe's fraud, but animal control was maintaining their position that military-trained dogs required special oversight regardless of criminal circumstances. The judge would have to balance public safety concerns against property rights and animal welfare, with our family's future hanging in the balance. "Mr. Hamilton," our lawyer said, "tomorrow's hearing will determine whether your dogs are heroes who helped expose a criminal conspiracy or weapons that need to be controlled by the state. Make sure your wife is ready to demonstrate their training, because everything depends on showing the court exactly what kind of animals we're really dealing with. During Chloe's final statement, she said something that made every person in that courtroom go silent. Even the judge stopped writing. The question she asked made us realize that maybe, just maybe, we hadn't won after all. But what could she possibly have left to threaten us with? Comment below if you think Chloe still has one final card to play, or if justice is finally served. What would you do if someone threatened your family like this? Share your thoughts before we find out how this really ends. Chapter 7. Victory has 4 paws, 1,200 words. Tuesday's federal hearing was supposed to determine whether Titan and Zara were dangerous weapons or family heroes, but Chloe's final statement turned the whole proceeding into something nobody expected. Standing there in her orange jumpsuit, handcuffed and facing decades in prison, she looked directly at the judge and said, "Your Honor, those dogs aren't just trained killers. They're evidence of a military weapons trafficking operation that the Hamiltons have been running through their supposed dog training business." The courtroom went completely silent. Even our lawyer stopped writing. Here was a woman facing life in federal prison, using her last moments of freedom to launch one final attack designed to destroy us, even if she couldn't save herself. The judge actually leaned forward and asked Chloe to explain her accusation, probably because claiming federal weapons trafficking in open court isn't something you hear every day. Chloe's lawyer tried to shut her down, but she kept talking, spinning this elaborate conspiracy theory about how Lily's dog training business was actually a front for selling military K9s to civilian buyers without proper licensing. These animals were never legally transferred to civilian ownership, she claimed, and the Hamiltons have been operating an illegal weapons dealership disguised as pet training services. It was complete nonsense, but it was the kind of nonsense that could tie up federal investigations for months while our dogs sat in government custody. Even facing her own destruction, Chloe was still trying to take us down with her. That's when Agent Morgan stood up and delivered the most satisfying courtroom moment I've ever witnessed. He calmly explained to the judge that the FBI had been investigating Chloe's claims as part of their fraud case, and they'd already verified our dog's legal transfer records, service documentation, and retirement papers through Department of Defense databases. "Your Honor," Morgan said, "Miss, Foster's accusations are demonstrably false and appear to be a final attempt at witness intimidation. Her own recorded communications show this is personal revenge, not legitimate concern about weapons trafficking." The judge's expression shifted from curious to annoyed as she realized Chloe was wasting the court's time with lies that could be disproven in 5 minutes of paperwork review. But the real showstopper came when the judge asked Lily to demonstrate Titan and Zara's training for the court record. This wasn't supposed to be part of the hearing, but Chloe's accusations had made it necessary to prove our dog's legal status and proper civilian control. Lily walked both dogs into the center of the courtroom, and what happened next was like watching pure artistry in motion. "Search," she commanded, and Titan immediately began methodically checking the courtroom for any unusual scents or hidden objects. Guard formation, and both dogs moved into protective positions around her without any aggression or tension. Crowd control, and they created a perfect perimeter that managed the movement of everyone in the room without intimidation or threat. Finally, stand down, and both animals immediately returned to relaxed sitting positions, proving absolute discipline under pressure and unfamiliar circumstances. The courtroom demonstration was so impressive that several people actually applauded when it finished, including some of the court officers who had probably never seen that level of control and precision from civilian-owned animals. The judge made notes about extraordinary discipline and textbook protective behavior without aggression, while Chloe's lawyer visibly gave up any hope of convincing anyone that our dogs posed public safety risks. Even the animal control representatives admitted they'd never seen such clear evidence of proper military training adapted successfully to civilian life. Agent Morgan later told reporters that Titan and Zara had demonstrated the gold standard for retired service animal integration into family environments. These weren't weapons hiding as pets. They were heroes who had successfully transitioned from military service to family protection. The sentencing phase delivered justice so complete and satisfying that I almost felt bad for Chloe. Almost, but not quite. Federal Judge Patricia Wells didn't just throw the book at her, she threw the entire library. 8 years in federal prison for racketeering, fraud, and organized criminal activity. $1.2 million in restitution to be paid to victims across all 7 neighborhoods. Permanent ban from any HOA involvement, real estate activity, or property management roles. Complete forfeiture of all assets, including the house she'd bought with stolen money and the car she'd used to conduct surveillance on our family. The judge's final comments were brutal. Miss Foster, you use positions of trust to terrorize families and steal their life savings. You turn community organizations into weapons for personal gain. The sentence reflects not just your crimes, but your complete lack of remorse for the devastation you caused. The media coverage that followed was like watching karma deliver justice with perfect precision and maximum public humiliation. Local news led with HOA fraud queen gets 8 years, while national outlets picked up the story as military dogs expose housing scam. Prison transport photos showed Chloe crying in handcuffs, completely broken by the realization that her revenge campaign had backfired so spectacularly that she'd destroyed her own life worse than we ever could have. Online comments were merciless. Should have picked on someone without military backup. And those dogs are smarter than most humans. The woman who'd spent 3 years trying to make our lives miserable had become a national joke and a cautionary tale about the consequences of targeting the wrong family. 6 months later, our neighborhood transformed into the kind of community Chloe had pretended to care about, but never actually wanted. With the fake HOA dissolved and all fraudulent fees refunded, families started investing in genuine improvements rather than paying protection money to avoid harassment. Property values actually increased once people realized they were free from Chloe's arbitrary rules and punishment schemes. Mike Torres organized monthly block parties where Titan and Zara became neighborhood celebrities, letting kids pet them while Lily explained the difference between military training and aggression. The dogs went from being feared as dangerous weapons to being beloved as community protectors who'd saved everyone from years of continued abuse. Lily's anti-fraud K9 program became a national model for using retired military dogs to detect document forgery and financial crimes. Law enforcement agencies started requesting training for their own fraud units, and other military families with retired service dogs joined the program. These animals served our country overseas, Lily told one reporter, and now they're serving their communities at home by protecting families from the kind of predators who hide behind fake authority. The program's success proved that military training could be channeled into civilian protection without creating public safety risks, something animal control agencies across the country started recognizing in their policies. The final piece of justice came through a victim impact statement that Chloe was required to hear before sentencing. Families from all 7 neighborhoods she'd terrorized were allowed to describe how her schemes had affected their lives, and the testimony went on for hours. Children who'd been afraid to play outside because of her harassment, elderly couples forced from homes they'd lived in for decades, young families driven into debt by fraudulent fees and legal costs. The scope of human suffering Chloe had caused was staggering. When it was our turn to speak, Lily kept it simple. You tried to destroy our family because your fraud was exposed. Instead, you exposed yourself as exactly the kind of person who needed to be stopped. Chloe's final response was a written apology that nobody believed, claiming she was sorry for any misunderstandings and hoped everyone could move forward positively. But here's the question that still keeps me up at night. If 2 retired military dogs could uncover a criminal empire just by being loyal to their family, what other heroes are hiding in plain sight in your own neighborhood? Thanks for sticking with this whole insane ride. Hit that like button if you think Titan and Zara are the real heroes here. This is Blake from Echo Stories, and I'll catch you in the next video where hopefully nobody tries to mess with my family.